Welcome to Biography Central. You are listening to Life of Sri Ramakrishna, a complete biography. Chapter 56. After the passing. The most important matter that came up before the devotees at the Kasipur garden was how to preserve in a fitting manner the sacred relics of Sri Ramakrishna. The majority were in favor of purchasing a plot of land on the Ganges and interring the relics there. For want of funds, that project had to be abandoned. The householder devotees decided to preserve the ashes in a garden owned by Ramchandra Dutt at Kankargachi, near Calcutta, where the master had once been. The young disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, however, did not approve of the idea. They took the major portion of the bones and ashes and sent it to the house of Balaram Bose for regular worship, cherishing the ambition of burying it at the earliest opportunity somewhere on the bank of the Ganges. The rest of the ashes was taken over to Kankargachi and interred there on the Janmashtami day, in which ceremony the young disciples of the master assisted, Shashi carrying the sacred vessel on his head. Ram instituted a regular service there also. There were still a few days left before the expiration of the lease of the Kasipur garden. Of the young disciples of the master, some had lived there, and others came daily from their homes. The former had already renounced the world, and it was evident that some of the latter were preparing to do the same. What were all these young men to do? The householders who had been defraying the expenses of the master withdrew their aid, and some of them advised the youths to return home and lead the life of pious citizens. But close contact for so long with such burning renunciation and godliness made it impossible for them to return to the world. Surendranath Mithra said to them, "Brothers, where will you go? Let us hire a house where you will live together, and where we householders shall find a temporary refuge from our worldly cares. I used to contribute a trifle towards the expenses of the Kasipur garden. I shall gladly continue that bit of help, and you can at least have a roof over your head and lead a simple life." The young monks gratefully accepted the offer. A house was engaged at Baranagar, the first monastery of the Sannasin disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Gopal Jr., the young devotee, moved the master's bedding and other things there from Kasipur, and Sharat joined him at night. Gopal Sr. was the first regular inmate. Narendra, Shashi, Sharat, Babaram, and Naranjan used to visit the monastery every now and then. In a short time, however, they stayed there permanently. Tarak, Kali, Rakul, Latav, and Jogan went first to Vrindavan. The first three returned to the mutt in the course of a few months, and the others in a year. They were followed by Sharada and Sabod. And last came Gangadhar, Hari, and Tulasi. All of them were real sannyasins now, with new aspirations and new modes of life. The pivot of their thoughts was Sri Ramakrishna. The holy relics of the master were brought to the mutt from Balaram's house, and a regular worship of him as the guru, according to the injunctions laid down in the scriptures, was undertaken by the brotherhood. Thus, the master's dearly cherished ideal of monasticism took a concrete shape after his passing. The credit of it must go to Surendra. It was his generous heart that helped to lay the first brick of this citadel of monasticism in the soil of Bengal. It was he who looked after the infant monastery like a mother and guided it through 100 adverse circumstances. Afterwards, several other lay devotees joined hands with him in this labor of love. The task of rallying together those young men who, subsequent to the passing of the master, had gone back home and resumed their studies, fell naturally on Narendranath, whom the master himself had appointed their guardian. Though busy with his own domestic affairs, he lost no time in fulfilling the sacred trust that had been imposed upon him. He often visited these young disciples at their homes, dragged them from their studies, and injected into their drooping hearts the fiery message of renunciation. Disregarding their vacillations, he would spend hours in delineating the soul-stirring realizations of the master. Often, he would burst like a whirlwind upon them and drag them to the Baranagar mutt. There he would spend with them hour after hour in discussion, music, or chant. Soon their minds changed, and they realized that it was inconsistent to yearn for renunciation and at the same time to cling to the world. Sometimes, their guardians would come to induce them to return home. They would argue, implore, weep, or threaten, but all to no purpose, for the monks were inexorable. Some of the guardians laid the whole blame upon Narendranath. Rakul said to his father, "Why do you take the trouble to come here? I'm all right. Please bless me and forget all about me. Let me too forget you." This was the typical mental attitude of all. After obtaining a glimpse of divine bliss, they abhorred the world with its fascinations. They felt that they must realize God then and there, or die in the attempt. The Holy Mother tried to overcome her sense of irreparable loss by undertaking a vigorous course of sadhana at Vrindavan, Calcutta, or her native village. One part of the preordained purpose of her union with Sri Ramakrishna had been fulfilled, that is, the setting up of an ideal for the householders of today to follow according to their respective capacities. There still remained another part to be accomplished, namely, the transmission of the Master's spiritual power to thousands of devotees, and especially to women. It was for this that her valuable life was spared to humanity for many years. The householder devotees were also seized with a tremendous hankering for realization after separation from the Master. Nag Mahasaya, in particular, became almost mad for it. He spent days at a time without food or sleep, praying, meditating, and weeping. Friendly persuasions proved futile. When the news reached the monks at Bharanagore, Narendranath with Hari and Gangadhar went to see him in Calcutta. They found him in his hut, lying under a quilt, writhing in agony for God. Narendra said, "We are your guests today." His intention was to make him eat under this plea. Nag Mahasaya jumped up, cheerfully purchased food in the market. There was nothing in the hut, cooked it, and entertained his guests. But he himself would not eat. At Narendra's importunities, he only struck his head with the cooking pot, saying, "Shall I give food to this wretched body when it has not yet realized God?" Narendra, however, managed somehow to make him eat before leaving. Mahendra, Balaram, Grish, Devendra, and others were also deeply shocked at the Master's death. They wept in solitude and occasionally visited the brothers at the new monastery. They were comforted when they saw the lamp of spirituality burning in these ardent souls as bright as in the days of Kasipur, and realized that the Master, though physically absent, was present in spirit. These young monks represented, as it were, the collective aspect of the Master. As if enfranchised from the body, he himself were manifest in multiple forms. During the latter part of December 1886, the members of the Bharanagore monastery went to Antpur at the invitation of Baburam's mother. Here, Narendra gathered all the young disciples of the Master, and in the fervor of spiritual enthusiasm which was evoked here, the bond of fellowship among them was definitely sealed. The enthusiasm reached its height, quite unconsciously, on Christmas Eve, when before a burning log of wood Narendra and his brothers kept vigil, talking passionately of the life of Christ and the glories of renunciation. This stirred up the dormant spirit of renunciation in those who had lagged behind, and shortly after their return, the Bharanagore monastery had its full complement of monks, all pledged to a life of the highest asceticism. No chronicler can do full justice to the intense spiritual life these young monks led at Bharanagore. Those were days of illumination, rapture, and ecstasy. The more they felt the absence of the Master on the physical plane, the more intense was their desire to realize him as the expression of eternal truth in the recesses of their hearts. The glimpses of light which they, now and then, experienced only whetted their passion to possess it permanently. These boys literally became mad after God. No amount of privation or hardship, indifference or contumely was allowed to stand in their way. They were dead to the external world. A blazing fire raged within their souls. Doubts and disappointments there were now and then, but these were mere passing phases in the spiritual struggle, like little patches of cloud that hide the sun for a moment and then disappear. Fired with the tales of the tremendous austerities of Sri Ramakrishna, these monks practiced them to a great extent as regards food, dress, and other necessaries of life. Literally, they proved that man does not live by bread alone. Their food was the simplest that could be conceived. Rice, with or without salt, and boiled neem or bimbo leaves were the food upon which these youths, accustomed to luxurious living, subsisted. Sometimes they could not procure even these. Then they would shut the door and spend day and night in song and prayer. 1 piece of cloth and 2 pieces of loincloth were all that any could boast of in the way of clothing. Satisfied with such food and raiment, they practiced devotional exercises either in the mutt premises or in the adjoining cremation ground, where they would go at dead of night and pass hours in prayer and meditation. The curious part of it was that the more numerous the obstacles, the greater was their zeal for realization. How to realize God was their one thought. Character building and realization became the watchwords of their life. They abhorred preaching. Some even thought of ending their lives by continued meditation without food. At that time, they lived and moved and had their being in the Spirit of God. Narendra was their leader. He was alive to the difficulties of the religious path. So, with the utmost caution, he began to mold their lives. He tried to broaden their outlook by saturating their minds with universal ideas and making them conversant with the essentials of the different branches of human knowledge. The topics he took up for discussion were many and varied, ranging from comparative religion and philosophy to history and science. Narendra had a gigantic intellect, and his personality was overwhelming. No wonder, therefore, that his brother disciples looked upon him with the highest veneration, considering him to be the mouthpiece of Sri Ramakrishna himself. Most of the sublime ideas which he afterwards gave to the world as the great Swami Vivekananda were not new, except in the way in which they were expressed to these brother monks, for they had heard them in the Baranagore days or even earlier at Kasipur. Shashi was like the mother of them all. His entire sadhana consisted in faithfully conducting the worship of Sri Ramakrishna and serving his brother disciples. He was the main pillar of the mutt, said Swami Vivekananda, referring to him. Without him, life in the monastery would have been impossible. Often, the monks would be lost in prayer and meditation, with no thought of food, and Shashi would wait with their meals ready, or even drag them out of their meditation. Rakal was the Raja of the Brotherhood. He, too, was overpowered with an intense idea of vairagya. Often, he thought of going to a solitary place, such as the banks of the sacred Nirmada, to meditate. Kali was the most assiduous student of the mutt. In addition to his spiritual practices, he would shut himself in his room and study his books, Vedanta, the Upanishads, or Western philosophy. The others also dived deep in the search for spiritual jewels, every one according to his taste. Not a moment was lost. After some time, even the holy atmosphere of the Baranagore mutt seemed to become constricting to them. They were anxious to go out into the wide world and live as wandering monks, depending solely on God. So one by one they went, determined to tread the path of austerity and renunciation hallowed by the footsteps of the ancient Indian monks. But not Shashi. He chose to stay by the sacred relics of the Master. They wandered all over the country from the Himalayas to Cape Comorin, Kanyakumari, relying solely upon God. How faithful they were in their austerities. They had to undergo the travails of a new birth to become the spiritual giants the world knew later. They had left behind their near and dear ones. They stamped out their heart's desires and suffered the anguish and agony that all seers and saints have had to endure. But behind this metamorphosis, there was the constant and unerring hand of the man who chiseled their characters, curbed the impetuosity of their spirit, held tight the reins that directed their course, and brought about their perfection. The immense possibilities which at the very first sight Sri Ramakrishna had detected in them, and openly prophesied for them, were materialized in the fullness of time. As a matter of fact, every one of these young men whom the Master had made his very own represented one or more phases of his own personality. The great qualities of head and heart which have found their expression in these spiritual giants, in those who have passed away as well as in those who are still living, give us some idea, at least, of how wonderful must have been the illustrious prototype in whom these qualities appeared in the highest degree. When Swami Vivekananda rose to the highest pinnacle of his fame, when East and West vied with each other to honor him, this was the tribute he paid to his Master. If there has been anything achieved by me, by thoughts, or words, or deeds, If from my lips has ever fallen one word that has helped anyone in the world, I lay no claim to it. It was his. But if there have been curses falling from my lips, if there has been hatred coming out of me, it is all mine and not his. All that has been weak has been mine, and all that has been life-giving, strengthening, pure, and holy has been his inspiration, his words, and he himself. Yes, my friends, the world has yet to know that man. I hope you like this chapter. We need volunteers and sponsors to create content with even better quality and with more variety. If you wish to join this initiative as a volunteer or sponsor, please click the links given in description below. To help us reach more viewers, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Biography Central. Thank you for your time. It means a lot. Namaste.